in the spring heat of 1200 BC. The courtyard of Karnak shimmered under a white sun. The air smelled of incense and dust, of stone baked too long by the light of gods. A young girl, Nefertari, knelt on the polished slabs, while 3 priests moved around her in slow, careful movements. Bronze razors flashed in their hands. Each scrape cut through another strand of her black hair until it drifted to the ground like dark feathers. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but the moment felt like death. Her father watched from the shadows, head bowed, telling himself this was an honor. The priests called it cleaning. They said the gods wanted her beauty, her silence, her childhood. But the Temple of Amun did not give gifts, it took them. Behind its tall pillars and painted walls, something far older than faith moved, a hunger for power, hidden beneath the mask of holiness. What if the most beautiful temples of Egypt, those monuments of golden light, hid the darkest crimes in history? What if every hymn and offering was built upon the suffering of the innocent? Because here in the heart of Egypt, beauty was born from obedience and obedience from pain. To understand what happened to Nefertari, you must first understand the world that owned her. The temples of Egypt were not just places of worship. They were empires, vast breathing machines of wealth and control. From the Nile Delta to the cliffs of Thebes, temples owned more land than any noble, commanded more workers than any army, and stored more gold than most pharaohs dared count. Each temple was a kingdom within a kingdom. At its top stood the high priest, the speaker for the gods. Beneath him, the lesser priests, scribes, ritual keepers, keepers of grain, interpreters of dreams, and beneath them, the invisible majority, the attendants, the servants, the singers, and the women called Hemet, the wives of the god. Their titles sounded holy, their duties were anything but. Inside the temple of Amun at Karnak, the high priest's word was as powerful as the pharaoh himself. His seal could move soldiers, redirect harvests, and condemn families to debt. Temples did not merely pray for rain. They owned the rain. They collected taxes in grain, lent it at interest, and punished those who could not repay. When a man fell behind on his dues, the temple took his land. If he had no land left to give, they took his daughter. Officially, these girls became servants of the god. In truth, they were living property, unpaid labor disguised as devotion. The temple system was built on their silence. In ancient papyrus, you find no mention of screams, no ink spilled for sorrow. The records speak only of offerings and purifications. One scroll from Thebes lists the number of linens woven by temple women each month, over 3,000 yards. Another mentions new girls added to the house of Amun. No names, no ages, just numbers. It was all carefully organized. Every woman had a role. Some ground barley for offerings. Others tended lamps or swept sacred floors. A chosen few were elevated, dressed in fine linen, taught hymns, and made to perform before the god's statue. They were called pure, holy, blessed. But purity in this place meant something far different from innocence. Temples shone with gold outside, but inside they were filled with silence and tears. Marble courtyards sparkled under the sun, while in the hidden chambers, women knelt for hours in forced prayer. Their voices, once songs, had become whispers. To the world beyond those walls, the temples represented harmony, divine order, the heartbeat of Egypt's greatness. But within, they were machines of obedience. Faith had become a currency traded for power. And through it all, the high priests preached that every command came from the gods themselves. It was a perfect system, one where questioning cruelty meant questioning divinity. This was the empire Nefertari had been sold into, a world where holiness had a price. and the cost was always paid in flesh. No child ever walked willingly through the gates of a temple. They arrived by debt, by devotion, or by conquest. 3 paths, all leading to the same end. The first was debt repayment. Egypt's temples were more than sanctuaries. They were banks wrapped in gold. A man who could not repay his grain loan faced ruin. His fields would be seized, his house emptied, but the priests offered mercy of a kind. The gods are generous, they said. Dedicate your daughter. Let her serve in purity, and your sins will be washed away. It sounded holy, like redemption. But what it meant was ownership. The girl became the temple's property. Her father's debt was forgiven, yes, but at the cost of her freedom. Families called it an offering. The priests called it salvation. The truth was slavery. The second path was piety. In times of plague or drought, desperate parents sought divine favor. They believed giving a daughter to the gods would bring healing or rain. It was an old superstition, a cruel inheritance from 1,000 years of fear. The priests encouraged it. They smiled gently as they told mothers, "Your child will live in light. She will serve beside the divine." Those words were practiced, rehearsed to sound like mercy. But once the girl vanished behind temple walls, her name was never spoken again. The family was told to rejoice, to be proud. Their daughter, they said, now lived among the sacred. The mother's tears were called weakness, her doubt, blasphemy. The third path was the cruelest, tribute and conquest. Egypt's armies swept across Nubia, Libya, and the Levant, taking more than gold. Children were counted among the spoils of war, their names replaced with numbers. That is how Iseri came to the temple. She was 10 years old when the drought struck her Libyan village. The crops withered, the animals died, and hunger gnawed at every door. When soldiers arrived demanding tribute for Pharaoh, there was nothing left to give. Her mother offered the only thing she had. Iseri remembered her mother's hands trembling as she brushed the dust from her daughter's cheeks. "You are blessed," she whispered. "The gods will feed you. You'll live." But the soldiers' ropes told another story. Iseri thought she was going to serve in the palace. She imagined polished floors and golden statues. Instead, she was marched across the desert to Thebes, chained with others her age, until the great walls of the temple rose before her like a prison of light. Inside, the priests greeted them with smiles. "You have been chosen," they said. "You will live among the gods." That was the illusion of choice, the perfect deception. The priests spoke in the language of faith, but every word concealed the same truth. These girls were currency, traded between poverty and power. They were not chosen by the gods. They were taken by men. Before a girl could serve the gods, she had to be broken. The priests called it purification, but what they really meant was possession. Nefertari's initiation began at dawn. The temple doors closed behind her with a sound that would haunt her dreams forever. She was led to a stone pool, its surface shimmering under torchlight. The air smelled of salt, incense, and fear. 5 figures waited. 3 priests, 2 older women. One of them was Tia, a priestess whose face was lined not only with age, but with resignation. "Remove your garments," one priest ordered. Nefertari hesitated, clutching the linen at her chest. A slap broke the silence. The fabric tore away. The child stood trembling as the water began to move. The priests dipped their hands in the pool and began the ritual. Washing her, they said, in the name of the god Amun, but it was no cleansing. Their hands lingered too long, their inspection too slow. When she flinched, one whispered, "Be still, the gods are watching." And just like that, innocence was renamed obedience. Across the river in the temple of Mut, another child waited. Mutamoya, taken from Nubia, did not understand the words they spoke. When they poured the cold water over her head, she gasped. The women beside her laughed. Her fear, to them, was proof of impurity. Her tears were washed away with the same salt water that scoured the floor. After the water came the shaving. Every strand of hair was scraped from their heads, their eyebrows, even their lashes. Hair was beauty, memory, identity, and the priests knew that. When Nefertari looked into the bronze mirror afterward, she saw a stranger. "You are reborn," Tia whispered, but her voice trembled. She remembered saying the same words decades earlier, believing them once. Now they tasted like ash. The girls were given new names. Nefertari became Nefer-Nebet, a beautiful lady. Mutamoya became the hand of the goddess. Their birth names were forbidden, called unclean. The names their mothers gave them were erased from every record. Then came the divine marriage ceremony. It was the final act of surrender. The girls were dressed in white linen, their heads covered with golden wigs, and led before towering statues of their deities. Priests recited sacred words, claiming the god himself would speak through them. Nefertari swore her vows to Amun. Mutamoya swore hers to Mut. They repeated every line they were told, not understanding the meaning. "My body is yours. My life is your property." And when the vows ended, the temple owned them completely. Only Tia lingered in the shadows, watching. Her hands, once steady in service, now trembled. She had bathed hundreds of girls, shaved their heads, spoken the same hollow blessings, but that night, she couldn't sleep. For the first time in 30 years, she wondered if the gods were ever watching at all. Life inside the temple followed a rhythm so precise it crushed the soul. Every morning began before sunrise, when the sky was still the color of ash. The sound of the temple gong summoned them from sleep. Dozens of girls, bald, barefoot and silent, rose from straw mats and knelt in a single line. The first ritual of the day was purification by water, a cold reminder that their bodies were not their own. They washed themselves in the sacred pools while an overseer recited verses from the Book of Purity. It was a thin scroll kept under lock and seal, a manual written by priests long dead. Every rule inside it shaped the women's existence. A servant of the god must not speak unless commanded. She must not look directly upon a priest. She must eat in silence, sleep without dreaming, and desire nothing. Each line carved obedience deeper into their bones. Obedience, the priest said, is holiness. After washing, the girls dressed in plain linen robes. Their heads gleamed under the rising sun like rows of polished stone. Then came labor, hours spent grinding grain, weaving linen, or cleaning the temple's endless corridors. The younger ones sang hymns as they worked, their voices thin and trembling. The songs praised the gods, but the lyrics had been twisted long ago. To serve is joy, to obey is peace, to question is sin. If a girl grew tired or her weaving slowed, the overseer's staff would remind her of duty. There were no tears, no outcry, just the hollow rhythm of survival. Every motion was watched, every whisper measured. Even friendship was forbidden. Connection bred defiance, and defiance was impurity. When Nefertari spoke too kindly to another girl, she was forced to kneel in the courtyard, under the burning sun, until her lips cracked. Tia, the older priestess, was ordered to read from the Book of Purity as punishment was carried out. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with quiet shame. Yet not all was silence. Beneath the sound of chants and footsteps, a different rhythm pulsed, a secret language hidden in the looms. One evening, as Nefertari wove linen for the altar, she noticed something strange in the threads. Tiny patterns that did not belong. When she traced them with her fingers, she saw a faint symbol, an eye crossed by a single line. An older woman whispered the meaning when no one was listening. "It means I see. It means we are not blind." It was the first time Nefertari realized rebellion could be silent, too. That night, as the temple's torches flickered and the priests spoke of divine voices, Nefertari looked toward the great statue of Amun and thought, "The gods never spoke. Only men did." And in that thought, the first crack appeared in her faith, a hairline fracture that would one day split the temple's perfect silence. Before we continue, take a breath. If this story has already unsettled you, that's good. Means you're still listening, still human. What you're hearing isn't a myth. Its history is stripped of its gold. Here, we uncover the stories the monuments refuse to tell. The truth hidden behind beauty, faith, and power. If you believe history should remember the voices it tried to erase, then stay with us. Hit subscribe, share this story, and help these forgotten lives be heard again. Every month, the temple prepared for what they called the Sacred Union, the holiest ritual of all. It was said to renew Egypt's life, to please the gods, and ensure the Nile's flood. In truth, it was the night the temple took the final thing the girls still owned, their innocence. The preparations began days before. Incense burned endlessly, filling the halls with thick, sweet smoke that clung to the skin. The women were washed again and again until their flesh stung. Their robes were replaced with silk-white linen. Gold bracelets adorned their wrists. To any outsider, it looked divine, a marriage between mortal and God. To Nefertari, it felt like a funeral. She was 14 when her turn came. Tia, now her guardian and silent confessor, helped fasten the golden wig over her shaven scalp. "You are to be blessed by Amun," whispered a priest. "The god himself will speak through his vessel." But the vessel was no god, only the high priest, cloaked in gold and shadow. His mask gleamed like the sun, his voice slow and commanding. The hymns around them rose higher, echoing through the pillars, as if the stone itself were complicit. When Nefertari entered the inner chamber, the air thickened with incense. The high priest stretched out his hands, his voice resonant. "You are chosen, the god claims you." She tried to kneel, to be obedient as she had been taught. But when his hand brushed her face, a chill of understanding cut through her. This was not devotion, this was power. And the gods, if they existed, were not here. Far away, in the temple of Mut, Mutamoya underwent her own ceremony. She stood before the statue of the goddess of motherhood. The cruel irony was not lost even to her young heart. The priests chanted, "Mut blesses her child," as the same ritual unfolded in silence and dread. The goddess of creation presided over a ritual of destruction. When it was over, both girls were led back to their quarters, their faces blank, their voices gone. The priests wrote in the record scrolls, "The god was pleased, the land will prosper." They called it holy. The truth would never be written, not in any official archive, but Tia was watching. For years she had obeyed, recited, and endured. But that night she saw Nefertari return from the inner chamber, trembling and hollow-eyed. Tia's faith cracked open. Later, when the torches burned low, she stole scraps of papyrus from the storeroom and began to write. Not prayers, but testimony. She wrote what she saw, what they all endured, every lie, every touch, every command, in the name of the gods. She hid the pages beneath the foundation stones of her quarters, sealing them away with wax. Centuries later, when archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Karnak, they found fragments of her writing. The ink was faint, but the words remained. The god took nothing. Only men did. Time moved strangely inside the temple. Seasons passed, but the walls never changed. The sun rose and fell on the same cold stones, and the gods, silent as ever, watched without pity. When Nefertari turned 16, her body began to change. The priests called it a sign of God's blessing. But the older women knew better. The sacred union had left its mark. She was with child. Pregnant women were hidden from the temple courtyards. They were moved to a separate wing where no outsiders could see them. There, the air smelled of incense and iron. The priests said these women were holy vessels of divine will. Yet when the children were born, the gods claimed them all. Nefertari gave birth on a summer night, the moon hanging pale above the temple roof. Her daughter came into the world silently, small and perfect. Tia was there, whispering prayers that had long lost their meaning. For 3 short years, Nefertari raised her child under the priest's watchful eyes, never truly a mother, always a servant. When the time came, they came for the girl. "She is chosen," said the high priest. "It is an honor." Nefertari tried to speak, but no sound left her throat. The child reached for her, tiny hands grasping at air as she was carried away. From that day, Nefertari never sang again. Her voice became another offering, one more thing the temple took. She returned to her duties in silence, weaving linens for rituals she no longer believed in. Sometimes she glimpsed her daughter in the distance, bold, small, dressed in white, walking in the same lines she once walked. Their eyes met once for the briefest second. Then the child was gone. The cycle continued. In the temple of Mut, Mutamoya's story unfolded the same way. Her daughter, born of coercion, was raised under the goddess's name. Mutamoya watched her endure the same purifications, the same lies. The songs were identical, the promises unchanged. The priests called it divine order. She called it repetition. Years blurred together until emotion itself became dangerous. The women learned to bury feeling deep within, where even the gods could not reach it. Tears brought punishment. Love brought loss. Numbness was survival. Tia, now old and weary, wrote again in her secret papyrus. When pain becomes routine, it ceases to shock, and that is the final victory of oppression. Not the body's breaking, but the heart's forgetting. She hid that line within a folded scrap of linen, sewn into the hem of a priest's robe. By the time Nefertari's daughter reached womanhood, the temple had perfected its cruelty. No one remembered the first girl who cried in its halls, nor the first mother who lost her child. Only the walls remembered, and the walls never spoke. Not every woman in the temple broke quietly. Some hearts, no matter how crushed, still remembered freedom. Her name was Renutma. She had served the temple of Amun for more than 20 years, long enough to know its lies by heart. Her voice had once been prized for hymns, her hands for weaving, but age had stripped away fear. Beneath the calm obedience she showed the priests, something had begun to smolder. It happened during the midday meal. The women sat in the great hall, eating in ritual silence, their heads bowed as priests walked among them. Renutma suddenly rose to her feet, the bowl of barley falling from her hands and shattering on the stone floor. "These men," she said, her voice trembling, "are not gods." The sound hung in the air like thunder. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. "They claim divinity," she continued, louder now, "but they feed on our bodies and call it holiness. They steal our daughters and name it devotion. There is no God in these walls, only men who fear the truth." The high priest's face turned cold. He did not shout. He simply raised one hand. Guards seized Renutma, dragging her toward the temple gates. The women watched, their hearts hammering. Some tried to pray, others could not even whisper. She was sentenced to dedication to the desert, the punishment reserved for blasphemers. No tomb, no burial, no return. The condemned were led beyond the temple's edge into the endless sand and left to the mercy of the sun. Tia followed at a distance, her old bones heavy, but her will unbroken. She dared not intervene, but she carried with her a small scrap of papyrus and a reed pen hidden in her sleeve. They left Renudma at the border where the stone gave way to sand. The priest turned back, chanting that the earth would purify her spirit. But Tia stayed long enough to hear Renudma's final words carried on the dry wind. "I am not impure," she whispered. "I am not afraid. Tell them, the gods do not speak to those who cannot hear suffering." Tia wrote those words with shaking hands, pressing the ink so hard it tore the papyrus. Then she buried it beneath a small cairn of stones before returning to the temple. 3 days later, the women were forced to march into the desert to see what remained. Renutma's body lay half buried in sand, her eyes open toward the sky. The high priest declared, "This is the fate of the impure." But Tia knew better. As the wind howled across the dunes, it carried Renutma's defiance far beyond the walls of Amun. The desert swallowed her body, but not her silence. Somewhere beneath the shifting sands, her words endured, proof that even in the heart of tyranny, truth refuses to die. Even after Renutma's death, the temple could not silence everything. Words are like seeds. Even buried, they find ways to grow. Among the women, resistance took the shape of whispers and symbols. They could not fight with weapons, so they fought with memory. When they wove linen for the altars, some began to hide tiny imperfections, a thread pulled loose, a stitch slightly crooked. To the priests, it looked like an error. To those who knew, it was code. A single twisted thread might mean, "I remember." A row of knots formed the words, "I resist." Small defiance, invisible to power, yet powerful enough to remind them they were still human. Others carved faint marks into the backs of pillars or the underside of ritual tables, places the priests would never see. Simple phrases in hieratic script. "I existed. I was born free. The gods were silent, but I spoke." Their rebellion was not loud. It was woven into stone and fiber, patient and enduring. Mutamoya, the Nubian girl who had once been taken from her village, carried the fire of remembrance longer than most. She was old when her body began to fail, but her memory stayed sharp. 2 nights before her death, she returned secretly to the dark storage chamber beneath the Temple of Mut. The air was cold, smelling of dust and decay. She held a piece of pottery shard, her only canvas. With a fragment of bronze, she scratched her final words. "I came from beyond the first waterfall. My mother's name was Mandisa. I remember her song. I never forgot who I was before they took me. This life was not my choice. If you find this, know that I lived. Know that I remembered." When she finished, Mutamoya pressed her forehead against the wall and smiled for the first time in years. The next morning, she was gone. Tia found the inscription days later. Her old hands trembled as she traced the letters. That night, she gathered her secret writings, the testimonies, the names, the truth of what had happened within those sacred walls. She wrapped them in linen, sealed them with wax, and hid them beneath the temple stones, whispering, "If the gods are silent, let the earth speak." Thousands of years passed. The desert swallowed the temple, and time buried its cruelty. But stone remembers what man forgets. When archaeologists unearthed the ruins of Karnak, they found the fragments, tiny carvings, faint symbols, and a sealed bundle of papyrus blackened by age. Inside were Tia's words, Renutma's defiance, Mutamoya's song. The scholars called it the testimony of the silent. For the first time in 3,000 years, the women's voices spoke again, not in hymns, but in truth. The world had forgotten them. The earth had not. Today, sunlight floods the courtyards of Karnak. Tourists lift their cameras, smiling beneath the same pillars where Nefertari once knelt. They see beauty, not bondage. They see the art, not the agony. The guides speak of gods, dynasties, and glory. None mention the girls who lived and died unseen. Every empire builds monuments. Few remember the bones beneath them. We tell ourselves that civilization means progress, but history whispers otherwise. Wherever power gathers behind walls and faith turns into fear, the story repeats. The names change, the robes, the gods, but the silence feels the same. The true lesson of the temples isn't carved in stone. It's written in what was erased, the humanity taken from those who served. If you listen closely, beneath the noise of the crowds, you can still hear them. The faint rhythm of looms. The hush of voices saying, "I existed." The stones still remember. The gods are silent. But their servants, the forgotten women, still whisper if you know how to listen. If these voices reach you, don't let them vanish again. Share their story. Keep their memory alive. Subscribe where truth digs deeper than gold, and history speaks for those the world chose to silence. Together, we uncover what time tried to bury, the truth that still breathes beneath the ruins, because remembrance is the only prayer the dead can still receive, and you are now their witness.